Pat Morita, the star of Karate Kid, talked candidly about the true behind the scenes of the film that transformed his life before he passed away. Fans only saw the composed and sage Mr. Miyagi on screen for years. Few, however, were aware of the difficulties, close calls, and pivotal moments that nearly prevented him from ever playing the part. Come learn the little-known tale of Pat Morita's struggle to become Mr. Miyagi and what he disclosed about the Karate Kid prior to his passing. The Invisible Wall. People envision Mr. Miyagi as the smart, composed, and silently strong Mr. Miyagi when they think about the Karate Kid. However, Pat Morita encountered a barrier that nearly put an end to his chances of landing the part before he became that iconic character. At the time, Morita wasn't considered a serious actor in Hollywood. He was mostly recognized as a regular on sitcoms, a witty man, and a stand-up comedian. His charm, timing, and sense of humor were all adored by audiences. He wasn't someone who could provide profound, dramatic performances. Instead, he was the guy who made folks laugh on sitcoms like Happy Days. This picture of him stuck in your mind. Hollywood has a way of categorizing people. And it's nearly hard to get out of one once you're inside. The comic label turned out to be Pat Morita's largest challenge. Executives and producers were unable to see him as a serious person. For them, Mr. Miyagi had to be a mentor, a man with a history, a war veteran, and a bearer of both wisdom and suffering. They believed that Morita was the complete opposite because of his comic background. Producer Jerry Weintraub immediately brushed his name aside when it was initially mentioned in relation to the Karate Kid. According to reports, he stated that a comedian should not have the part. He desired a man who exuded natural weight and gravitas. Pat Morita was not, in Weintraub's opinion, that man. His choice was irrevocable. Not even a test, no chances, no auditions. Weintraub found it absurd that Pat Morita would play Mr. Miyagi. Morita's name continued to be ignored for weeks. It was always taken off of lists of potential actors before they could even be discussed. It was as though Hollywood itself had determined that he wasn't suitable for important parts. This was quite discouraging to Pat. He had spent his entire life trying to gain recognition and respect, but his prior comedic success had turned into a liability. It was preventing him from playing the one part that would really showcase his abilities. Director John Avildsen, who had already produced Rocky: A Classic, had a different idea, but Weintraub remained steadfast in his rejection. He thought that the Karate Kid was more than just a fighting movie. It was about healing, suffering, and mentoring. He believed that the relationship between Daniel and Miyagi was important to the narrative. Preconceived notions and well-known names didn't matter to him. He desired to see humanity and truth on TV. Avildsen pushed back silently. He requested that all potential actors be tested, including ones the producers were not interested in seeing. He did that to keep the door open for unanticipated talent. He realized that the proper individual might not always be on the list. He was interested in what each actor had to offer. And Pat Morita was one of them. Still, it took a long time. Weintraub and the studio looked everywhere else, looking through lengthy lists of actors who had the kind of dramatic history Hollywood trusted, or who looked and sounded like the character. Morita's name was never taken seriously, it was always a whisper in the background. Weintraub was persuaded to give him at least one chance by casting directors. However, the producer repeatedly declined. Avildsen's perseverance eventually paid off. Even though it was merely a formality, he demanded that Morita be given the opportunity to audition. Weeks had gone by that point, and scores of actors had already been spotted. The last person on the list was Pat Morita. The last name is the why not choice. It was never his intention to enter the room. Allowing him to try was made more as a book closer than as a door opener. However, that one action, that one tiny opportunity, would soon alter everything. It was the turning point that would turn Morita from an obscure comic into one of the most adored teachers in film. However, no one was aware of it at the time. Pat himself and everyone else believed it to be just another dead end. Pat Morita was at the bottom of his career when he was finally called to try out. He was exhausted after years of rejection. In order to make ends meet, he had been taking on odd jobs while looking for opportunities that would allow him to showcase his range. It was no longer a calling to act. It seemed like a journey with no end in sight. He brought all of that burden with him as he entered that audition room. He had no expectation of being selected. No one in the room, he thought, even believed in him. He knew he had to try, so he went nevertheless. With everything he had, he knew that this would be his final rejection, even if it was another one. That one opportunity wasn't only an audition for Morita. It was a hopeful moment. It demonstrated that sometimes life pushes a door open even when people close it. He realized that the opportunity was unique and that perhaps, just possibly, it was meant for him. It was the first day of something he had never anticipated. Not just a significant advancement in his profession, but also a radical change in the way the world would perceive him. Everything will soon begin to alter in a bizarre audition room with just one man watching and one camera. The test of the one-man camera. Pat Morita anticipated the typical Hollywood scene when he eventually entered the Karate Kid audition room. There may be a camera set up across the room, a few individuals seated at a table, and someone holding a clipboard. Rather, he entered a nearly empty room. There was only one man waiting for him, and the room was silent and devoid of outside distractions. The filmmaker, John Avildsen. However, Avildsen didn't appear to be a typical director on that particular day. He was carrying a bulky power pack around him and a camera fastened on his shoulder. Would thereafter characterize him as half machine, half man? It was an odd sight, and it immediately changed the mood of the moment. Avildsen made a kind introduction without lowering the camera. As soon as Pat walked into the room, he began recording. There was no official establishment. When no one was performing for Pat, it felt more like a test of his true self. Morita was in front of the camera and Avildsen was behind it. There were no casting assistants or producers. Pat was initially anxious. He was aware that this was his one opportunity to prove he was more than just a comedian. He became conscious of every word and every movement in the silence. However, as the minutes went by, that anxiety started to subside. He was not hurried, directed, or interrupted by Avildsen. He simply listened as Pat spoke. Something uncommon was made possible by that tiny bit of freedom. The performance became instinctive. Morita shared himself without trying to impress. He discussed his life, his hardships, and what it meant to be given a second shot at last. The man in front of the camera stopped acting as the tightness in his shoulders gradually subsided. He was just being himself. Something remarkable was made possible by that serenity. That day, Pat was worn out from years of struggling to be taken seriously as well as from traveling. The manner he spoke betrayed his weariness. His tone was low, deliberate, and sluggish. More significance was conveyed by the silences in between his phrases than by the actual words. The rhythm of his speaking, which would eventually come to characterize Mr. Miyagi's speech pattern, was influenced by this inherent weariness. It was instantly recognizable to Avildsen. He had no desire for a well-executed performance. He desired the kind of truth that was unassailable. Thus, he continued to roll the camera. Pat had no idea how much time had gone by. They started off talking informally before switching to scripted scenarios. There was only a man standing in front of a lens, expressing years of spoken passion. There was no set, no costume, and no co-star. I thought the audition was ended when he was done. He packed his belongings and prepared to leave. Avildsen muttered something that stopped him cold as he got to the door. Pat? Would you mind bringing your script along? You might need it. That one sentence changed everything. It wasn't said as a joke or a polite gesture. It was a clue, a quiet signal that Avildsen saw something in him that everyone else had missed. For the first time, Pat felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone believed he could do it. He didn't say much back, just smiled, nodded, and left the room with his heart racing. That was the moment he later described as the turning point, the second when he realized he might actually become Mr. Miyagi. What started as another desperate audition had become something deeper. He hadn't just played a character. He had revealed himself. After that day, John Avildsen knew he had found his Miyagi. But there was still one huge problem. Jerry Weintraub. The producer who had refused to even consider Pat was still convinced he wasn't right for the role. Avildsen decided to let the footage speak for itself. In a meeting with Weintraub and the other producers, he played the audition tape. The room was quiet as the screen came to life. There was Pat, not the comedian, not the man from Happy Days. But a calm, steady figure with a heavy presence. He wasn't delivering lines like an actor. He was speaking like someone who had lived them. The tired eyes, the soft tone, and the measured pauses, it all felt real. When the tape ended, there was silence. Then Weintraub broke it. He leaned forward and said, "Hey, wait a minute. That looks like Miyagi." Avildsen turned to him and replied, "That's Pat Morita, the one you didn't want to read for the part." It was the moment everything changed. The same man who had been dismissed without a chance was now the clear favorite. That single tape had broken through weeks of doubt and disbelief. Morita didn't have to fight anymore. The camera had done it for him. From that day on, no one in the room questioned if Pat could play Mr. Miyagi. They had seen it with their own eyes. The man they thought couldn't carry drama had carried the entire story in a few quiet minutes of proving he could be Miyagi. Winning over the room with one strong audition wasn't enough. After John Avildsen showed the tape and changed a few minds, the studio still wanted proof that Pat Morita could repeat that magic again and again. What followed was a string of 5 separate tests. Each session asked him to show the same focus, the same calm power, and the same depth. It wasn't about one lucky day anymore. It was about consistency and control, the words executives used to press their point. They wanted to be sure the performance would hold under pressure. On a busy set with long days and tight schedules. For Pat, this meant walking back into rooms that had once dismissed him and keeping steady each time. He had to perform scenes in different ways, take direction on the spot, and prove he could live inside Miyagi without slipping. The tests weren't flashy. They were focused on craft. Could he land the pauses? Could he carry pain without overplaying it? Could he guide the boy at the center of the story while staying grounded and quiet? With each pass, he showed he could. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He let the character breathe through him and gave the room what it needed to see. Reliability. Even with these wins, the mood around the tests was strict. Executives watched closely. They looked for cracks. But each time, Morita held the line. He showed the same presence that had moved Avildsen in the bare audition room. Piece by piece, the doubts started to loosen. What began as a plan to test him into failure turned into confirmation that he belonged. The third test raised the stakes. It was no longer just about Morita alone. The story lived or died on the connection between Mr. Miyagi and Daniel LaRusso, played by Ralph Macchio. So the next step was to see them together. Ralph flew in from New York, and the room shifted from a solo audition to a true screen test for chemistry. Their first reads were simple, a few lines, a few exchanges, but underneath the words, something important started to show. Morita's patience and calm gave Ralph room to be open and young and full of questions. Ralph's nervous energy gave Morita a reason to respond with care. The rhythm between them made the scenes feel natural. It didn't look rehearsed. It looked like two people meeting at the right time in their lives. As they moved to bigger scenes, the father-son dynamic revealed itself. Morita listened, and Ralph leaned in. The quiet humor landed without trying. The pauses filled with meaning. The words about chores, training, and respect felt real. In real time, the bond that would hold the film together formed in front of the camera. The team watching the monitor could see it. You can't fake trust, and trust is what began to glow between them. This was the anchor the movie needed. By the fourth test, the studio wanted to know if the image could match the feeling. They asked Morita to read in costume. He put on a simple GI. He kept the beard and hair that had already changed how people looked at him. He stood there not as a comedian trying to play serious, but as a man who looked like he had lived a life of work and loss. Ralph later said the transformation was immediate. He became Miyagi. It wasn't just the clothes. It was how Morita carried himself once he wore them. His posture changed, his eyes softened, but stayed alert. The room felt different, and even the doubters noticed. Costumes can help an actor, but here they unlocked something. The crew and executives started to see not just a strong audition, but a full character they could place into every scene of the film. Anxiety in the studio eased into quiet awe. People who had only seen a comedian began to respect the discipline in front of them. The more Morita settled into the look, the more the look disappeared and the man remained. That is what moved the room. The costume didn't make him Miyagi. It allowed everyone else to finally see the Miyagi that had been there the whole time. The fifth and final test removed every safety net. No set dressing. No score to lift emotion. No crowd to feed energy. Just a cold soundstage, a camera, and the two actors. It was a deliberate trial. If the heart of the story could survive this, it would survive anything. They played key moments. Morita kept his voice low and clear. Ralph responded, less as an actor reading lines and more as a boy finding someone to trust. The air in the room held steady. No one rushed to fill the silences, and those silences started to speak for them. The camera caught it all. The care in Morita's gaze. The way Ralph's shoulders dropped when he felt safe. And the small half-smiles that meant more than big speeches. When the scene ended, the room stayed still. People didn't need to talk. They had seen the truth on the monitor. This wasn't a gamble anymore. It was proof. The chemistry was there. The character was there. The film had found its core. With that final hush, the tests accomplished what they were meant to do. They showed that Pat Morita wasn't borrowing Miyagi for a moment. He was carrying him for an entire film. Next comes the call that changed everything. And the words no one expected the producer to say. Hall that flipped the room. When the final screen test ended, the studio room fell into silence. For the first time, even Jerry Weintraub, the man who had once said a comedian should never play Mr. Miyagi, was quiet. On the monitor in front of him, Pat Morita and Ralph Macchio had just delivered something that no one expected. The room had been filled with people ready to judge, but by the end, they were simply watching. What started as another cautious test turned into a quiet moment of understanding. Weintraub leaned forward, watching Pat's calm face on the screen. The man he had once dismissed as too funny was now bringing tears to people's eyes with almost no movement, no music, and no tricks. The final test scene, an emotional exchange between Miyagi and Daniel, didn't need anything extra. It was raw and real. Pat's voice carried the weight of a man who had lived through loss. Ralph's eyes showed trust and warmth. It felt like two people meeting through honesty, not acting. As the scene ended, no one clapped. No one spoke. That silence was the proof Avildsen had been waiting for. He had known from the first audition that Morita had the heart of Miyagi, but now everyone else could see it too. Weintraub sat back. Thoughtful, his mind had shifted. The producer who once refused to even let Morita audition was now faced with the undeniable truth. The film needed him. The tension in the room was gone. In its place was respect. That day marked a change in tone across the production. The disbelief that had followed Morita from one test to another finally cracked. Avildsen didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He knew that the tape and the performance had done the talking. Morita had not only earned the role, but he had also changed the atmosphere around the movie. The people who once saw him as a risk now understood he was the reason the film would work. While all this was happening, Pat Morita was at home. He didn't know what was being discussed, and no one had told him how the final test had gone. He had done his best and left it behind, trying not to think too much about it. Still, waiting was hard. Every actor knows that after an audition, silence can mean anything. Days of doubt can stretch forever when a career depends on one decision. Then the phone rang. On the other end was Jerry Weintraub. Pat didn't expect to hear from him personally. And when he realized who it was, he braced himself for bad news. But Weintraub's voice was different. No arrogance. No harsh tone. Instead, he spoke with a mix of honesty and humility. "Pat," he said, "I almost made the worst mistake of my life." There was a short pause before he continued. "I just want to be the first to congratulate you. You've got the part of Miyagi." For a moment, Pat didn't speak. The words hung there, heavy and unreal. Then he let out a quiet breath. After all the rejection, the endless tests and the doubts, it was done. He had the role. But his reaction wasn't loud or proud. There was no gloating. No, "I told you so." That wasn't his way. He simply thanked Weintraub and said how grateful he was for the chance. It was a calm victory built on patience and grace. Morita never spoke harshly about Weintraub afterward. In later interviews, he even said he respected the man for admitting he was wrong. To Pat, that call wasn't just good news. It was closure. It was proof that persistence could turn disbelief into respect, even in a business known for closing its doors too quickly. When he hung up, he sat for a long time in quiet thought. The role he had fought for was finally his, and he knew what it meant. It wasn't only about work. It was about being seen for who he truly was. The night of the drunk Miyagi scene for Pat Morita, one of the most powerful nights on the Karate Kid set, came during the filming of the drunk Miyagi scene. It was a quiet, emotional moment when Mr. Miyagi opened up about losing his wife and child while serving in World War II. The scene revealed the man behind the mentor, the pain, the loneliness, and the depth of the character. The studio was unsure about including it. Some executives thought it might slow down the film or confuse audiences who saw Miyagi as the calm teacher and not as someone broken by grief. But Pat fought for it. He believed the scene was essential. It showed who Miyagi truly was and explained the strength behind his calm. Without it, Miyagi would have been only a guide, not a man. On the night of filming, the set felt heavy. The crew dimmed the lights and the sound of crickets played faintly in the background. Pat didn't need much direction. He walked into the scene carrying decades of personal experience, his struggles as a comedian, his memories of wartime internment camps, and his journey through rejection in Hollywood. When the cameras rolled, he didn't act. He remembered. The performance was raw. His words came out broken and uneven, filled with quiet sorrow. When he finished, no one moved. The crew didn't clap. They didn't speak. They simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle. It was one of those rare times when everyone knew they had just witnessed something real. Pat later said that night meant more to him than any award he could have received. It proved to him the truth could outshine everything else: humor, fame, and expectation. Another moment that Pat loved came from the opposite end of the emotional scale, the fly and chopstick scene. It was one of the film's funniest sequences, where Miyagi calmly tries to catch a fly with chopsticks, as Daniel watches. On paper, it was a simple gag, but on set, it became something more. Pat played it with quiet focus, his eyes locked on the invisible fly as if it were the most serious task in the world. Ralph Macchio watched, half amused and half impressed, while trying to follow along. The laughter that came when Daniel succeeded wasn't planned. It was real. Both actors broke into genuine smiles, and the crew joined in. For Pat, that scene showed the true spirit of the Karate Kid. It wasn't about martial arts or competition. It was about patience, humor, and the small lessons that reveal character. He loved that the audience could laugh with Miyagi, not at him. He made sure the humor felt warm, never mocking. Later, he would say that the scene's balance of comedy and calm reminded him that even light moments can teach something lasting. Off-screen, Pat Morita wasn't just a co-star to Ralph Macchio. He became a mentor. Ralph was still a teenager during filming, trying to handle sudden fame and the pressure of leading a major movie. Pat noticed his uncertainty and quietly guided him through it. He talked to Ralph about patience, professionalism, and enjoying the process rather than chasing results. Their friendship grew naturally. Between takes, they often sat together, sharing food or stories. Pat would tell him about his life before acting, his struggles, and the lessons he'd learned along the way. Ralph listened, sometimes forgetting that this man had once been a stand-up comedian. Their connection off-camera mirrored what the audience would later see between Daniel and Miyagi. There was a sense of care and trust that couldn't be faked. Ralph would later say that his scenes with Pat worked because they were real. He wasn't pretending to look up to him. He truly did. In the early days of filming, some members of the crew still had doubts about Morita. They wondered if the comedian from Happy Days could pull off a serious role. But as production went on, that skepticism faded. Every day, Pat proved he wasn't playing a part. He was living it. He developed small rituals to stay grounded in Miyagi's mindset. Sometimes before shooting, he would quietly sit in a corner, mumbling short thoughts in Miyagi's tone to stay connected to the character. He also kept a calm presence on set, speaking softly and offering bits of advice or humor to the crew. Over time, people started coming to him with questions or just to talk. They called it getting Miyagi wisdom, half as a joke, but also because his calm answers often helped. By the time filming wrapped, the atmosphere around him had changed completely. The same crew who once doubted him now looked at him with respect and warmth. When the cameras stopped rolling and the production ended, Pat carried those quiet moments with him. The laughter from the chopstick scene, the tears from the drunk Miyagi night, and the bond with Ralph Macchio all stayed close to his heart. Those experiences reminded him that the movie's real magic wasn't in the big fight scenes or the famous crane kick. It was in the relationships and the truth shared between people. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes Hollywood stories, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload.